more than 150 customers worldwide. We are proud of our customers' successes and are thrilled to receive industry recognition for some of the work we've done over these years. Next slide. RSuite CMS is RSI's enterprise content management system designed specifically for publishers and media companies. RSuite is used to store, manage, edit, and deliver content. In 2006, the first version of RSuite CMS was released, and today RSuite serves a number of publishing verticals, including scientific, technical, medical publishers, educational publishers, scholarly publishers, religious publishers, and many more. Some of the world's leading publishers are using RSuite CMS, and some publishers who you may not be familiar with use the system as well. And now I'd like to introduce Linda Marone from Data Conversion Laboratory, and she's going to tell us a little bit about DCL services.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar today. For those of you who are not familiar with Data Conversion Laboratory, we convert and organize content to create electronic documents, ebooks, populate databases, publish on the web, and basically get content ready for tomorrow's technology. DCL services help you refine document conversion strategy, identify redundant content, extract metadata, and transform legacy and future documents for real needs. Next slide, please, Vincent. Our list of services spans from audio-video transcription, composition, consulting, content reuse analysis, digital publishing, document and image conversion, ebook production, project setup management, quality assurance, translation services, and workflow analysis. We serve a broad client base, as you will note, spanning all industries: publishing, government, life sciences, manufacturing, financial, telecommunications, computing, utilities, and so on. And now, Marianne.
Thanks, Linda. We had a little glitch with our recording at the beginning of this webinar, but I'm happy to announce that's been resolved, and indeed, this is being recorded. So you can, the good stuff is now being recorded, and that's what you'll probably want to share with your colleagues. So before we introduce Dianne, I'm going to launch an online poll to understand where your organization sits with this topic of automation. So we've just launched this poll, and if you could select the places in your organization where you want to automate some kind of process, you can select all that apply. So we'll give everyone a couple minutes to just go ahead and click on the screen and answering the best answer. And note, you can answer more than one. And a number of you are still voting. Okay, in just a second, we're going to close the poll. Although so many votes are still coming in, we'll let it go just another 20 seconds. Okay, we're going to close the poll now and share the results with everyone. And at this time, I'm happy to introduce Dianne Kennedy. Dianne?
Hi, everyone. So when I first saw this poll, it seemed to me that I couldn't answer just one answer. And in fact, we see three very prominent answers. with almost the same number of people responding to that. The selections on the poll were content conversion. In other words, we need to automate somehow getting from one format to another. It might be, for example, Word to XML. It might be InDesign to XML. It might be XML to another flavor of XML. There are about 19% that are interested in using automation for supply chain, which I think does stand pretty separately on its own from some of the other choices. Editorial and production workflows, having automation around those. Cross-channel content delivery, in other words, delivering your content to, let's say, print, a smartphone, and an iPad, and then the elusive other. This gives us a context for talking about automation, and certainly I know I couldn't have answered just one, and it seems that that's the case with many of you. So I need to have the controls passed to me, and here we go. As Marianne said, my name is Dianne Kennedy, and I'm with an association called IDEAlliance. Some of you may know us, and some of you may not. But IDEAlliance is a nonprofit member association. We really are a global community. In addition to IDEAlliance here in North America, we have IDEAlliance in China, in Korea, in Colombia, and in Mexico. So we have quite a few locations and over 1,000 member organizations worldwide. Our focus is on technology and identifying best practices for the efficient end-to-end digital media workflow. So when we talk about best practices and specifications, and we talk about efficiency, you know that behind the scenes we're going to be also talking about automation. Our website, www.idealliance.org. I think one of the unique propositions of IDEAlliance is the fact that instead of being an association that directly addresses one vertical, if you will, we actually have members from across the supply chain. So I'll pick on Society of Scholarly Publishers. Guess who belongs to that? Scholarly Publishers. If you pick on the Magazine and Media Association, guess what? It's magazine and media companies that belong. But IDEAlliance has a membership that crosses that media supply chain. So we have organizations that represent the creative process, that represent production, that are publishers, that are companies that provide technologies like an Adobe or a Microsoft. Really Strategies, which is now RSI, is a member of IDEAlliance. So that we, advertising agencies, pre-media service providers, conversion providers. And so our value proposition is bringing people from across that supply chain to look at not only efficiencies and automation within one sector of the supply chain, but actually across that supply chain. Okay, let me see if I can advance. So a bit of history. Some of you may have known IDEAlliance as Graphic Communications Association. We were actually founded back in 1966. The original name was GCCA, Graphic Communications Computer Association, and we were founded under another, as a member sector, under another large association at the time, PIA, which was Printing Industries of America. IDEAlliance, then GCA, came to be because in those days, in the late 60s, computers began to be applied to the process of printing and publishing, things that were happening. Now, then, at that time, in particular, were the computer-to-plate revolution, also the idea of automated composition replacing the linotype kind of composition for publishing. In the 80s, we began focusing on, in addition to how computers directly apply to print and publishing, to the idea of generic markup languages. IBM at the time was a member of IDEAlliance, and they had a concept that came out of IBM in the late 70s, early 80s that were called generic codes. Generic codes then eventually became something that some of us remember called SGML and now XML. GCA hosted the ISO working group that developed SGML, and at our conference in 1997, the web community and the SGML community came together and developed this new markup language called XML, and that was announced and premiered at the IDEAlliance Markup Conference, or the GCA Markup Conference of that year. Today, we host many activities that focus on automation and efficiencies across the supply chain. Supply chain automation, which some of you had selected on that poll, is something that we focus on in a number of ways. I happen to be highly involved with an automation activity called Mail.dat and Mail XML. We work as a partner, industry partner with the United States Post Office in automating all the logistics behind postal and mailing. Whether it's sending catalogs and magazines from a printer to the subscribers in the newsstand, all the way to a first-class letter, all of that web services automation that's going on behind the scenes are specifications that come from IDEAlliance. If you happen to work with the idea of printing on paper, your publications may be printed on paper, that global supply chain is controlled by a set of e-business specifications called PAPINet. It's the paper and actually all forest products work under that supply chain automation XML specification, in which IDEAlliance is one of two global partners, the other partner coming out of Europe. If you have anything to do with color management and print image quality, IDEAlliance has global activities in those areas. And it turns out that it's very scientific, and new specifications are being adopted to control how the printed image and eventually the images on tablets and smartphones look to the human eye. And color is encoded in CXF, which is a color XML format, and all of that comes under the auspices of IDEAlliance. My focus is really on cross-channel content delivery. We have a number of initiatives underway that address cross-channel content delivery, and the truth is that you're not going to be able to efficiently deliver across media channels without automation. And if you're going to automate, you need standards and you need best practices to be followed, and that's where I come into play. I'll be talking about a number of the activities today and where new kinds of automation is being brought to the publishing process. Now, there always are roadblocks to automation. First roadblock is a lack of technology. I could make this easier. I could make this more efficient if only I had this software, this tool. Lack of technology always stands in the way of automation. And one role that I play in my activities is not only engaging the people who would like to see automation, but those who automate, and bringing them together in this membership cross media supply chain environment so that the manufacturers of technology can begin to understand what those using the technology have envisioned, how they wish to automate. Of course, lack of technology, another thing that's required for automation is our standards and specifications. And IDEAlliance plays a major role there as well. And then finally, attitudes. Attitudes play at least a 50% role as a roadblock to automation. Attitudes like Well, if we automate, will profitability really result? Show me where that profitability will come from. There are a lot of people who are very hesitant about automation, particularly if they're the workers and they see that automation might cause their job to go away. So the loss of job security is at times a roadblock to automation. And then there's the final roadblock, which is, okay, if we automate, will we have the quality that we have today? I think one of the places where you see that, and we've seen a sea change over the past 5 years, is actually in the area of printing and color quality. Printing may be very far from your area of expertise, but there have always been a whole school of printers that believe that printing is not an industrial operation to be automated, but rather that it's a real art or a real craft, and it requires the eye of the craftsman to have everything look wonderful when it's printed. The reality is that without automation, you may lose your job because your company may go out of business. Without automation, the truth is your quality might not be as high as if you automated. So there's always all of these factors whenever an organization or an industry undertakes an automation project. In this session, I'm going to be discussing some opportunities to advance automation for publishing systems where there have been little, if any, automation to date. We'll be talking about where the roadblocks exist, what the opportunities are, and where standards and technologies and services all play a role. So one of the questions you were asked in your poll talked about the automation of editorial and production functions. I come out of the world of actually I would say reference publishing and technical publishing are two terms that are often applied to my background in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s. In the mid-1980s, with the advent and really with the adoption of the SGML standard and the idea that the codes that you put in your content did not necessarily have to be limited to codes that said make it big, make it bold, put it in the center, but that the codes could have dual purposes. And the adoption of generic coding and SGML really changed the publishing world. It was a disruptive influence. In the mid-80s, we began to see the publishing world be split into two very distinct worlds. The first world were those publishers who focused on content. So they were legal publications, pharmaceutical publications, scholarly publishing, and technical publishing. And if you saw the resumes and the companies that both of our sponsors today listed as their customers, and you think about it, most of their customers today, those people that are using those tools and services to automate the editorial and production cycles, were those kinds of publishers that focus on content. It's much more natural for those kinds of publications to give up control, the individual design and craftsmanship that was involved in publishing in the early 80s than it was for the second group of publishers, and those are the publishers that focus on design. In that area, you primarily see magazines and those kinds of operations that focus on marketing and advertising. And if you were to look at the customers that exist today for our hosts, you'd probably find very few of those companies that focus on design automating. And that historically goes back to the 1980s. With the advent of SGML and the idea of putting codes in and automating layout and design, those that could do that and could see a real value in it, automated. They adopted automated structure-based editorial tools. They adopted content management systems. They converted what they had into HTML or XML. But those organizations that were publishers that focused on design really dug their heels in. They loved their desktop publishing systems. They loved the idea that the art director was the major organization within a publishing company that controlled the publication and what went into it. If you come from a world where content is king, this seems very strange and foreign to you. And actually, I came from that technical, scholarly publishing world. When I began working with GCA and IDEAlliance, many of their members were major magazine and media companies like Time and Hearst and Condé Nast. And I'd have conversations with them, and they would just say, you don't get it. You don't understand. Content is not king for us. What is king is design. The art director holds, all the cards in those operations, and automation, therefore, was really and remains so very, very limited. So the content-based publishers are those where content is central, and they moved in the mid-'80s through, the early 2000s. Most of them moved toward workflows that had XML first or XML early. So basically, they were authoring the content, which was the point of publishing to them, and they used automated, they used XML-based content repositories, and they used tools that could automate the layout based on XML structures, whether those were high-speed batch pagination engines from a company like Datalogix, where I came from, or whether they employed XSLT to transform the XML into formatted and rendered technical publications. They really moved toward automation and have been doing so for quite a while. Okay. Let me advance. On the other hand, we have publishing like the ones that you see in this picture. All of these are very design-oriented. They cannot easily be rendered with a computer algorithm which says, when I hit a chapter, break to the next odd page, lead down 12 points, change your font and point size to 14 bold Arial, center the heading, automatically the chapter number, and then move into two-column text. There are no such algorithms and standardized rules when you get to publications like this. Design-based publications have really employed to date only minimal automation. The art director holds the cards. Design comes first. And everyone knows you can't automate design. And I'm not actually insinuating that you can automate good design. But as we'll see throughout this presentation, I think there are new opportunities for automation and new attitudes towards it. So basically, design came first. When a new issue of a magazine or one of these publications, it's not just magazines, by the way. So think about travel books and cookbooks and any kind of coffee table books where there's a lot of design to the book. The design came first. Then the content typically is assigned and created to follow the design. There's very few of these kinds of publications that employ XML first or could do it any other way. If there are XML repositories, and by this time all the major publishers of this design-based kind of publishing have established XML-based content repositories, but they're not used to publish a product per se. Initially, they were used for editorial research and to distribute published materials post-publication to content aggregators. Some of the publishers are also using the content in these repositories to create special non-subscription editions. So recently, with Whitney Houston passed away, and you may have seen on the newsstand memorial commemorative issues for Whitney Houston. If you were to examine the content in those design-oriented publications, you'd find that some of the content had been repurposed because the publisher had databases that they created after the fact of all the stories and the photos and so forth of Whitney Houston's life, thus enabling them to create special products, even books, from their content. But it's a very different kind of XML publishing, and it doesn't violate the design first, and even though there is some automation implied, it's not really tremendous. But then the world changed. April 2010, the world for this kind of publisher, the design-based publisher, really changed. And that was the month when the iPad hit the market space. The iPad really made the vision for the future of publishing for these publishers very, very real. They all knew and had IT departments who told them on a daily, if weekly basis that they should be somehow incorporating XML and automation in their workflows. They all knew the gospel, but there was no real reason for them to do it then until the iPad came to market. When the iPad came to market, these publishers had less than 80 days with the device in their hand to figure out how they were going to offer their content on that device. Hopefully some of you have seen magazines, if not on an iPad, on other tablets, and seen what a change this has meant. In technical terms, iPad was what we call a disruptive change, just like HTML in the 80s was a disruptive change. The iPad sold 15 million its first year. You all know that new tablets are coming to market every day. I just heard this week about a new Sony tablet. It's just called the Sony tablet, and it combines your ability to watch TV, play Sony PlayStation games, read magazines, do your email, your Facebook, tweet, use the web, and so forth. So new tablets come to market every day. And it's really been, it's really coming true that these tablet devices, in many cases, are replacing PCs as the personal computing platform of choice. They don't do everything a PC can do, but for most people, they really are replacing the computer. Of course, when the iPad came to market for these design-based publishers, there was a huge impact on the workflow. Before tablets, magazines and other design-oriented publications had a very linear print-first workflow. They created their content in a whole bunch of tools. They had workflow tools, and they had pre-media tools that let them proof and make sure everything was correct. And then they bundled their publication up as a PDF X1A that could drive presses, and they delivered print output. All of a sudden, we had a very compelling new publishing platform, the tablet. But how could the publishers get to the tablet? And they only had 80 days to get their first publications there when the iPad launched. And it was highly competitive, and everyone wanted to be there. And the answer was, workflows must evolve, and in the end, everybody now realizes that automation must be put in place. Initially, there was a separate workflow based on print to send things to tablets. And it was very stressful times. No organizations were hiring. So basically, they used the same staff and pretty much the same tools, and they did their work twice. in order to get the magazine on the newsstand and in the iTunes or Amazon store at the same time it hit the newsstand. The paradigm was to develop an alternate layout, so they had two designs that was designed for, in this case, the iPad size and aspect ratio. They also had to scramble because why read, why read a magazine on a tablet unless it sings and dances? It needs to have rich media layered on top. And then a complicating factor is all the magazines and publications in general that you see on a tablet have been compiled based on the operating system. So if you're now publishing to print and 3 tablets, you have 4 workflows, if you will, that are running in parallel. Technology providers, being what they always are, were in a race to develop new tools to support this paradigm. But in the meantime, this was just the beginning, the iPad. So the iPad, following the iPad, there were new sizes. And there are a certain number of publishers who say, I will be everywhere. Every new platform that comes online, I'm going to be there. But that means extra parallel workflows for new sizes, new aspect ratios, and new operating systems. You can't play an app that was built for iOS on an Android device. And we're all holding our breath because Windows 8 will be coming, IE 8 will be coming out with new, as a new operating system that many people are waiting for. So really the iPad was a call to action. And this was very painful. If you think of having a workflow and now your work is doubled in the same amount of time and then tripled in the same amount of time, publishers very quickly began, for design-oriented publications, to say, hey, I guess I am going to have to think about automating. New solutions had to be found for publishers and agencies. In 2010, exactly the same month as the iPad came out, in fact, IDEAlliance had a meeting in New York with numerous of the leading publishers, and also the folks from IDPS. I don't know if you know who they are, but they're the people that were designing EPUB 3. EPUB 3 and the work that IDEAlliance is doing is very collaborative. We work together all the time, even though their types of publications, the trade magazine or the trade books are different. We wanted to have a lot of collaboration, so we were sharing information and following strategies together. So IDEAlliance launched something called NextPub. First of all, it was a technology incubator. So it brought together publishers and those providing technologies and services so that we could strategize about what the future is. Not just how today can I deliver on an iPad and a Kindle Fire, but how in the future I can have workflows that are automated, efficient, to get me to all the channels I want to go to. So every meeting that we have, we see new pre-release technologies where the technology vendors brainstorm with us and jointly help to design the tools for tomorrow's productivity. And we're developing a standards-based infrastructure foundation for the future. These are some of our sponsors and partners. You'll see that RSI is one of those. And you'll see other companies that you might recognize, whether they're on the content development side like Adobe, whether they're an XML content management system or a DAM, a digital asset management system, or workflow systems. You'll also see the names of a couple of other associations here. IDEAlliance works as partners in this effort with MPA, which is the Magazine Media Association. with the 4 A's, which are the Advertising Agencies of America, and one of their initiatives, AdID. And we've also been joined by the Japanese, JMPA, the Japanese Magazine Publishing Association, in our work. And you'll see new upcoming companies there as well. So what's the solution? How can we take our content everywhere? And we've all decided that the solution is in the source. That's kind of our tagline, our motto, and has really guided the specifications that we're developing. So it's a view of having digital first, or at the minimum, digital early. And I want to stress how revolutionary this is for publishers who have traditionally had publications that were design-oriented. Digital first means that these publishers are beginning to see that we might, even though the design may be done first for a magazine or a display book, that the content might actually be authored into a structured editing environment, which is then moved into an environment where the design is applied to that content. And we might have one design for a print view, and a second design for a tablet view, and a third design for another tablet, and a fourth for a smartphone. Now, this isn't the way we do things today, but it certainly is a vision for the future. So today, these publishers have and are still suffering with a very serial or linear workflow. There's very little automation in those publishing environments. Today, the design is done for all editions. So if I'm publishing a document, a magazine, whatever, catalog that's going to be in print and on different tablet devices, I start with the art, I start with the design, but I do the design for all these editions up front. Then I create my print layout first. Once the print layout is created, the content is created. So the content, whether it's photos or written pieces, editorials, whatever it may be, is put in that print layout. Then advertisement is inserted. I send the final product to the printer. It takes some time to print, and it's delivered to the newsstand. At the same time, when my print layout is complete, I then have the same content put into one or more digital layouts. That means I might have to re-edit the content, and if there's links, I have to relink it, a new table of contents, etc., new navigation. And if I have several tablets, I'm going to do that several times. And then I have to add rich media layers. I have to insert my advertisements. And I have to compile using that operating system of the target platform and publish that version as apps. The trick of all of this is that we want to deliver to the newsstand and to the App Store at the same time. And as you can see, it's highly labor-intensive, very little automation there. But there are new expectations that tablets have brought us that's changing opinions about workflows and automation. First one is that print is and will always remain two-dimensional. There's just no way around that. But the tablet editions have really moved us into a 3D world where we have layers of content, where we have new navigation kind of mechanisms. And it's really seriously caused those strategists in those publishing environments to question two things. Number one, does a print first workflow really still make sense? And I think most people have concluded that the answer to that is no. And can we automate design-based publications? And the answer to that is yes. We have to, for one thing, in order to stay viable financially. And with more new platforms coming online every day and a stressed workforce, we have to do that. Of course, then you can think back to the roadblocks that I put in front of this presentation. We need the technology, we need the standards, And of course, there's all those psychological factors that will be roadblocks. So after almost 2 years at the NextPub initiative, we've come to the idea that our solution is in the source. So how do we build the source? We followed a number of principles. One is to build on existing standards and infrastructures. Publishers cannot afford to throw everything out that they have, but they need to figure out how to add tools and technologies to that. And then secondly, we need to look to the future. We don't want to design something based on those antiquated, labor-intensive, non-automated workflows that you saw in the previous slide. We need to think about what's happening in the future. We need to future-proof. And as we said, we firmly believe that the solution is in the source. So we have to have digital early. There still is a great deal of pushback from design-oriented publications that will never be at a place where we can have content as digital first. I think with new tools that come to market, that will gradually change. I also think that for design-oriented publications, they're not all created equal. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with the New Yorker. New Yorker is a magazine. But if you think about it, another one is Woman's Day, also a magazine. But they're very structured. If you looked at an issue of the New Yorker from a year ago and now, you would see very little difference in the layout and the design. So it's not highly design-oriented. The same thing is true of magazines that cover news. So like Time magazine, a cover story may have a unique kind of a layout, but in general, it's a lot. In general, Time magazine, although it's branded and highly designed, is not as design-oriented as an Elle or a Vogue, for example, which looks so different story to story, let alone issue to issue. So right now, the consensus is digital early. New Yorker actually is the only magazine that I know of that has XML first, but digital early certainly. Platform agnostic, we're looking for tools that can let us maybe do the design and then pour the contents into the design, but the content's platform agnostic. We know that to do this, we need to have very rich semantics. In other words, every piece of content that's created or stored, we need to know many things about it so that we can basically pull this content together to create published products. We have, as a given, a central repository. A central repository is key to automation, and we can't do this without a central repository. And then from that central repository, we believe that we should be able to select and pull together, assemble content, transform it into the native language of whatever platform it's going to, package and deliver it. Now this is a key slide because it shows you not only the vision of the IDEAlliance NextPub initiative for those kinds of publications that are design-oriented, but it shows you the points of automation. The points of automation center around having digital content, capturing digital content. Who's good at capturing digital content? I think it's Data Conversion Lab. Having a central repository. Who's involved in that and has participated with NextPub? That's RSI, I believe. And who can help us to transform that platform agnostic, semantically rich content that we have in our NextPub source so that we can transform package and delivery. Again, services like Data Conversion Labs come into play. So automation based on PSV. The specifications that we've developed are called PRISM Source Vocabulary. And there's two components. There's a metadata component. That's the rich semantics that we use to configure our content management systems or to federate content management and digital asset management systems. And the XML source is based on something called PRISM, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But it's robust data about each article and each piece of content that's stored in a content repository. The usage rights. Do we have the right to use this, and on which platforms? It gives us the ability to search, find content, aggregate or assemble content so we can monetize it in new ways. And then the second part of this project is HTML5. We need a way to encode the content itself. Not just the headers and the paragraphs, but the titles of articles, the teasers, the decks, the sidebars, captions, credits, and even more. Together, these components define what NextPub believes is the solution. The solution is in the source, and the source is written according to a specification called PRISM Source Vocabulary. For us, the magic is in the metadata. We have 3 kinds of information about each piece of content you create or store. We need to know what type of content it is. Is it a magazine article? Is it a recipe? Is it a Sudoku? What is it? A unique identifier, which is, of course, a given for content management. And then these semantics, which let us find it, search it, select it, assemble it to create new publication products. So if you're not familiar with PRISM, it comes out of the world where publications are highly design-oriented. In the 80s and the 90s, these publications did not adopt XML, but they did see, their strategists did see that there was a reason for actually being able to label content in a way that we could store it and reuse it. And the activity, IDEAlliance activity, is called PRISM Publishing Requirements for Industry Standard Metadata. There were over 50 companies and 90 individuals that participated in this effort, and the first version of PRISM was published way back in 2001. PRISM is based, by the way, not only on XML, but on RDF. And so the RDF community, which has to do with metadata and the semantic web, had a huge influence on PRISM. It was implemented widely, it is implemented today widely among magazine publishers, but as I said, mostly for central content repositories for editorial research or delivering content to aggregators. In the past year, we have updated PRISM to a new version 3.0 to support this NextPub vision for a source that can drive all kinds of publishing for the future. It is a family of 10 metadata and controlled vocabulary specifications, and it addresses, although originally it was designed and used in magazine and journal publishing, it now addresses content across a wide spectrum of publishing and across all platforms. These are a few of the core vocabularies. It's very modular. Each module has its own namespace, and it's built on something called Dublin Core, which many metadata specifications are. PRISM also has a philosophy of not reinventing the wheel. So if someone like Dublin Core or IPTC had developed metadata specifications that we could recommend or extend, that's exactly what you found the PRISM activity to do. Now, PSV is a combination of metadata and content encoding. And PSV was designed to be built for the future. And we are actually basing content coding on HTML5. You all probably know HTML5 is an emerging technology, and that HTML5 is really a high integration between a markup language, a semantic markup language for content, cascading style sheets for styling and layout, and JavaScript to enable browser-based functionalities. Most people that think about HTML5 are blown away by its ability to sing and dance, making the browser do amazing things. And if you've been to presentations about why publishers should care about HTML5 what you probably hear is about, ooh, JavaScript, and oh, we can do all these things in the browser, and it's so lightweight. To me, the most important thing about HTML5 is it shifts from being a language that let you code layout, how something looked on a web page, to semantics. It separates with HTML5 content from styling. In fact, if you look at the HTML5 draft specification, it's titled HTML5, a vocabulary and associated APIs for HTML and XHTML. It is semantic. If you take a close look at it, you will see that the tags that had to do with formatting are gone. The attributes that you could put on HTML tags, for example, if you had a heading level 1, you could say font equals, color equals, size equals. All those attributes are gone, gone, gone. The only way you can apply style to a first level heading is through a link to a style sheet. The other thing that has happened is that every element in HTML5 has a class and an ID. So not only can you link it to style sheets, but you can have semantic meanings for everything in your HTML5 document. And that's why IDEAlliance and IDPF, that's developing the new EPUB for ebook specs, have decided on using HTML5. So if you are a fan of EPUB 3, the next generation of standard e-reader XML encoding, it's HTML5. If you have a Kindle Fire, it's using something under the covers called KF8, really HTML5. The Amazon Cloud Reader, the Apple iBook format, all based on HTML5. And we believe the best content encoding mechanism for the future. So we'll be launching our specifications for NextPub in June. And they're called the PRISM Source Vocabulary. PRISM Source Vocabulary is really designed to have your content be future ready. How do you create and manage content that's ready for print, web, mobile, tablets, and new publishing channels? The source is the solution, and PSV is that set of specifications. So that is where we think a lot of the automation is coming from. And I think it's real important to the two sponsors of this webinar because they focus on capturing digital content in XML, transforming, storing that content in a repository so we can assemble new products and products that go across channels, and finally transform and package that source into any format going forward. Publications in the scope of NextPub are listed here, and you see quite a broad scope, not just magazines, books, something new called bookazines. If you've not heard of that, it's a combination of a book and advertising. Think about all those cookbooks and travel books that would like to be bookazines because they have an extra revenue source. NextPub, the PRISM Source Vocabulary, is designed for all kinds of content, articles, blog entries, book chapters, and yes, we handle advertising. All kinds of content would be covered by this. And we really believe that PSV is a green light to automation. With PSV, the publishers who helped design this plan to publish initially across media channels. So make it easy to publish in print and on all these tablets and smartphones. But what we see emerging is you will see in the next 2 years your ability to subscribe to something that doesn't exist today, which is a publishing channel. So I know there's a major publisher that has 15 automotive and driving titles. Within the next 2 years, they'll be offering a channel where you can subscribe to a channel and get articles, select articles across the various magazine titles. It's not an issue of a magazine. It's something entirely new. And then if any of you have seen things like Flipbook, where you can actually begin to assemble your own content. Flipbook is to do with news, but extend that to a model beyond there where we can have very personalized subscription models. All of that is what PSD is preparing us for. So how can we PSD? Well, you've got to have that conversion. Somehow you've got to get your content into HTML5 with class semantics and into content repositories. We have to have new workflows where XML is early in those workflows. And most of these publishers, by the way, use Adobe InDesign. So we're going to have to figure out plugins, tools to help them do this. You would use PSD to configure your content management system. You may have to put in new systems, or you may be doing adding what's called a federation layer, a hub, if you will, to your existing systems so that we can look into them, search, and find what we want and assemble using PSD metadata. Now, I don't want to leave without talking just a little bit about advertising. IDEAlliance is very involved with advertising, and we have an initiative called the Digital Ad Lab. And our mission is to define specifications and best practices around advertising. And we partner with the 4As, which are the Advertising Agency Associations. The advertising our goal is to have automation for advertising. And it turns out that most of the automation is based on something called XMP. And I don't know if any of you have heard of XMP. Or not. So XMP, XMP is Adobe's extensible metadata platform. The idea behind XMP is brilliant, really. What it lets you do is it has a schema for little XML packets for metadata, and it lets you embed metadata in a standard location in every kind of rich media. So whether it's a PDF or an MP3 or MP4 or JPEG or whatever it is, you can actually embed XML metadata right in those media assets. And XMP holds the promise of a technology, XML-based technology that can let you automate your production workflows for rich media and for advertising. Okay. One of our projects has to do with ad portal automation. Advertisements are submitted from agencies to publishers through internet software products called portals. The portals are not really standard, and instead of standardizing on XML messages, like many of the e-business transactions are done, we're basically standardizing on XML expressions of standard metadata. What does the publisher need to know when the advertiser submits an ad to the portal? That's automation. And XMP is at the heart of that, and IDEAlliance has a new specification for this that's called ADAM. Let's see if I can get this. Okay. And ADAM is basically a new spec for automating these workflows between the advertising agencies and the publishers, both for print and for tablets, and it's all based on XML and metadata to enable automation. So there's been a lot of information here. Hopefully, by focusing on an area of publishing where there's been little automation to date, you've got the idea about some new places where automation is possible. I think for our sponsors, my message is these are new markets for you. These are places where we need the ability of the services and the content management systems that you provide to enable automation for this final frontier of publishing. Automation has been used in content-based publications for a long, long time. But applying automation to design-based publishing is difficult, but I think doable. And IDEAlliance is doing the best it can with our initiatives to help to drive this. You will need to engage service and solution providers to help you. XML early in the process for design-oriented publications has not happened before, but it is very critical for success. And it's the tablet publishing that's now driving these design-based publishers and the ad agencies to move toward automations and open new markets for the tools and services that are available today. So with that, I will sign off.
Thank you, Diane. That was really great. We have gone a little bit over time, but I have a couple questions that I would like to pose to you. Those who are still part of our webinar, we invite you to stay on, and if we understand if you need to get back to your work. So a lot of this presentation was focused around that design-driven world, magazines. Can you speak to how some of these specs and vocabularies relate to other publishing verticals, say tech hubs or STM, journal publishers?
So no matter what kind of publishing you're in, the solution is, the source is the solution. I think one of the lessons that can be learned from PSV is that I'm sure that there are other publishing areas where they would like to see automation, but they don't want to implement a highly structured XML environment. It may be there may be publishers who are who are not design oriented, but still have the requirement to establish a central content repository, publish to all different kinds of platforms, create new products. But it has been in the past very expensive to design your own metadata / taxonomies for your publication. And it also has been very expensive to have very detailed encoding of XML with custom XML authoring tools based on highly structured schemas. So this provides, I think, not only for the publishers, the publishers that I talk about while they do magazines, if you're a Time or a Emeritus Corporation or any that we associate with magazines, they also have book companies. They also have TV shows and blogs and websites, and what they're looking at doing is bringing all these together. So the PSV vocabulary and metadata vocabulary is not just for magazines. While it turns out that the names that you see as the publishers that help develop this spec you think of as magazine publishers, they have every bit as much interest in being able to publish books and other kind of publications. We've tried to do a really good job of coming up with metadata fields to describe other kinds of publishing, like books and textbooks and catalogs. The piece that needs to be put in place are maybe some more detailed metadata specifications for those. And some of those are actually starting under this umbrella.
Okay. And follow-up to that, what publishers do plan to use the PRISM source vocabulary?
I think the initial ones, and we will we talk to each other about our plans. The publishers like Time, Hearst, and Meredith, and it's the major big magazine publishers, I think, that are going to initially adopt this. They're adopting it not only so that they can simply publish their magazines in print and on these tablets, But these people have these real plans for the future of new content channels that don't exist today and the content personalization. But what we think is we're holding a summit in June in New York at Hearst Tower to talk to the content management vendors. It's kind of our strategy to see that if PSV could be built into content management systems, kind of off the shelf, if you will, it can shorten not only their sales cycle, but it can shorten their implementation cycle and the cost of implementing rich content management solutions for publishers that might not have necessarily been able to do that in the past.
Yeah, and I know RSuite plans to be at that summit to be able to do this for all types of publishers. I'm going to ask one final question, and then we'll have to end this webinar. A lot of great questions that we'll have to answer in our follow-up. But are there any developments in automation of preparing, processing images, figures, things like cropping or resizing or resolution quality checks?
I don't think so. At one time, there was a company that was very focused on that, and to my knowledge, that technology really never went anywhere, and it was through a series of business issues. But I'm certain that is possible. I do know that of the there are quite a number of new technology companies coming out of the woodwork, if you will. At the last NextPub meeting in New York, we had 5 new technology, pre-release new technology demonstrations of new technologies that are coming to market. Most of them have to do with dynamic content rendering. Whether it actually involves the kinds of things that you're talking about, I don't know. But you know, anytime there's a new opportunity, there are people that, innovative folks that will come to the plate with that. 2 of the demonstrations we have, by the way, came out of Europe. So there's you know, it's a global world now. It's not just those providing tools and services out of the U.S. But that's kind of what the NextPub Technology Incubator is trying to do, and it's just getting, I think, getting the word out. But now that you've mentioned this, I am going to try and contact the people that I knew that were working on that at one time. But I think there's a real need for it, for sure.
Yes, and I can speak from the CMS perspective. I know RSuite can be set up to perform various quality checks. You can set up business rules. So if an image is imported and doesn't meet a certain resolution that you expect, you can send off an alert in your workflow to various editorial production people. So it depends on what angle you want to come in at this this topic. Well, thank you so much for this presentation. Thank all of you. We have a large number of people who are still hanging around, even though we've gone a little bit late. Thank you for your time today. You will be receiving an email with a link to the recording of this webinar. And if you have any questions for any of us today, you can see our email addresses and our websites are here on the screen. We invite you to reach out to us personally. Thanks again for your time, and this now concludes our webinar.
Thank you.
Bye.